Alrighty, I'm going to do things a little bit different this time. I'm going to try something, see if I like it better, see if it works. So these are my notes, but I'm just going to kind of talk you through them and just kind of see how that goes for me, if it works better, and I can explain these concepts. I obviously have my son. I'm on dad duty right now, so you'll hear him talking and rattling. It's not me playing with a toy. Anyways, so just really quick about heart flow. So blood flows in through the superior and inferior vena cavas, right? Well, that's kind of cool. I like this. Okay, so blood flows in from the superior and inferior vena cava. They go into the right atrium here. Right atrium pumps blood through the tricuspid valve into the ventricles, into specifically the right ventricle. The right ventricle then contracts, sends blood up through this valve right here that's called the pulmonary semilunar valve, and it goes into these pulmonary arteries. And artery just denotes that it's going away from the heart. Vein denotes coming towards the heart. So this is the pulmonary artery. Even though it's deoxygenated blood, they're going to the heart. They come back through these pulmonary veins, coming in through here. They stop at the left atrium, is pumped through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, and then through the aortic semilunar valve to the ascending aorta, to the aortic arch that goes to the carotid and things like that, and then goes kind of down the descending aorta and then to the body, and it splits out from there. So today what we're going to talk about are these valves. We'll talk about that mainly at the end. We'll talk about how muscle contracts, in what direction it does. And we'll also just kind of talk a little bit more in depth about the function of the lungs, or of the heart, pardon me. So we have in cardiac muscle, we have two different muscles. First is that arrhythmic muscle. Autorhythmic. It's also called pacemaker cells. I'm going to put that in here for my own notes. These pacemaker cells, they actually do something really interesting. They have their own action potential that looks different from any other cell. We'll go and talk about this. But these are pacemaker cells, and pacemaker cells are connected to cardiomyocytes or contractile cells. These cardiomyocytes, they have these lines right here. Those are sarcomeres, actually. And these sarcomeres is what we use to contract. These sarcomeres look exactly like the ones that we reviewed in a skeletal muscle. So they have the myosin, they have the actin, they have the troponin, they have all of those things. And here we have the intercalated disc. These are the discs between the cardiomyocytes and the pacemaker or autorhythmic cells. Within in this disc here, we have a gap junction. This is kind of an opening where an action potential can kind of propagate in here to then open up some sodium channels that we have here that'll come in, and it'll make a positive boing, or an action potential that'll send down, and it'll go through this one. And then another sodium channel will open up here, and then it'll make another boing, and it'll just continue down and propagate down through that way. But it all starts at this autorhythmic or pacemaker cell. These desomeres, I don't even know how to say this, they connect each one of these. So there's a decimere here too, between contractile cells and between autorhythmic and contractile cells. These allow the mechanical leverage for contraction, because if not, these would just kind of pull apart, right? You can see that if this contracts this way and this goes that way, which is what a muscle contraction is, they'd separate, because this one is going to go this way, and that's going to go this way, and that's going to go this way, right? And so these would then oppose each other. And so it just kind of allows a fastening to it. So these autorhythmic cells, they actually depolarize in a really interesting way, which is what I was saying before. They have a resting membrane potential at -60. We have these IF channels. They're current funny channels. They're actually really weird. They're called the CHN channels, the cyclic nucleotide gated, or funny channels, because what's funny about them is that in this, so far in the course, all that we know is that sodium causes action potentials. But in this case, sodium does not cause action potentials. Sodium only gets our this graded potential, we'll call it. It only gets us from here to here. And this funny channel can do kind of cool things. So we have beta 1, right, and muscarinic 1. So this is the sympathetic nervous system. This is the parasympathetic nervous system. And those innervate this IF channel. So if we have that beta 1 innervation, we're going to have an increased heart rate. So we're going to have an increase of CAMP. And what CAMP does is it increases this, which means more sodium will come in, which means action potentials, right, as we're going here. When it comes down, it's going to come up quicker, and then it's going to come down and come up quicker. So we're going to get these closer and closer and closer together. This is going to come up like that, right? So it's going to speed it up. Now, if we decrease CAMP, which is what the muscarinic 2 would do, it would come in and it would make this a little bit longer. And then we get an action potential. And then make this a little longer. And then we get an action potential. And these action potentials is what propagates down through here, right? And sends a signal here to depolarize this to cause a contraction. So it's very, very, very proportional to our innervation for beta 1 and beta 2. And we see that kind of in inotropy and chronotropy. So inotropy is our contractility force. So it's how strong our contractility force is. So if it's a weaker contractility force, then we're going to get, when we're doing this here, if it's weaker, it's sorry, hold on, let me back up. So if inotropy is weaker, that really affects our contractility cells. And so these, I don't know why that's staying there. There it is. Oh, this is being weird. Anyway, so it really affects our contractile cells. But this is only innervated by the sympathetic nervous system. This is inotropy, the force of contraction, is only verdicted on sympathetic nervous system. Chronotropy is the speed of contraction. And that's kind of what we were talking about up here. Not there, up here, right? If we open up these CHN channels, then we can increase or decrease the heart rate. So what's interesting, this is kind of how it goes, is what'll happen is something will cause the IF channels to open. They'll open up, allowing sodium to come in. It'll hit threshold. That's this dotted line here. It'll hit threshold. Once it hits threshold, it allows calcium L-gated, so latent, or transient, T-gated, to open. This is going to cause that depolarization of the cell. Then those are going to close. Potassium's going to open, and potassium is going to repolarize it, just like what we see in kind of everything else. But these are not IK1 channels that we'll see in contractile muscle cells. These are just potassium. They're different types of cell. But what's really big about this is the fact that what causes depolarization is calcium, not sodium. That's something that's very unique to these autorhythmic cells, something that's very different. Let me make sure I kind of got everything here. Sodium rushes in, depolarizing until threshold, right? So it doesn't depolarize the cell, but it gets it to threshold. Repolarization. So, when it hits here, when repolarization occurs, I forgot about this. When repolarization occurs and it comes down like this, at threshold is when these channels start to open up. I know I wrote that wrong. I'm going to go fix that later. But when these, actually I'm going to fix it now because I'm going to forget later. They are the CHN channels. So once it hits threshold here, then these HCN channel or CHN channels will open and start, and these potassium channels will start to close, causing it to stop repolarizing, and it won't hyperpolarize, and it will just start again. And that's kind of how this system starts. It can be slowed down or sped up by innervations, which we have already talked about. This innervation is also by these GIRK channels, GIRK channels. These are only, they have mainly just sympathetic innervation to it. And so when it's a G protein, it's activated. And what that does is it allows potassium to leave, causing hyperpolarization. And so it'll be able to slow down these GIRK channels. We'll be able to kind of stop these from opening and prevent it from continuing. The other thing, so those were autorhythmic. Now down here, when we're talking about, these are contractile muscles. So what happens, we have a negative 90 is our resting membrane potential for these cells, because that's pretty much the driving force for potassium. And because there's not much else going in or out of this cell, our resting membrane potential is really based off of our driving force for potassium. So these are IK1 channels, so the current potassium 1 channels. That's what kind of maintains this resting membrane potential. What happens is that a BWONG is going to come in, or an action potential is going to come into this gap junction that's here. And that's why we see such a tight spike here, is because these gap junctions allow the action potential to go through, and immediately this sodium is going to depolarize this cell. But it just takes, once it hits threshold, then more sodium will come in. Now this is kind of where things get cool. So this ITO 1 and 2. So ITO, these are like, that is like the biggest handwriting I've ever seen in my whole life. This ITO, I'll just tell you, this ITO is 1 is a potassium, and the ITO 2 is a chlorine. So what happens, so this potassium will come out of the cell, and chloride is going to come into the cell. That just looks horrible. I kind of quit with this. I'm not going to do this again, that's for sure. It's going to come into the cell, and so we're going to start seeing a rapid depolarization. Now you may ask what this is. This is called the I know what it's called. Whatever. It's like a balancing act. That's what I've been calling it, and so now I can't think of what it's actually called. Plateau stage. So this is that plateau stage, and what happens is that these open, and so we're causing depolarization. But now the calcium channels open, and they start to leave this, or they start to come into the cell. They start to come into the cell. What that's going to do is it's going to make the cell, if we have a cell right here, it's going to make the cell more positive. So it's going to stop this repolarization here. And then these potassium channels are also going to open, but then that's going to make it, then if these come, it's going to cause this. So calcium causes this, and potassium causes this. And they kind of contradict each other, which is how we get this plateau. And this plateau is there so that we can give the muscles time to contract. That's what we want. We want the muscles to be able to contract. The contraction starts at the apex, twists up, and sends blood out. And so these all open. So the KUR is ultra rapid. The KR is just potassium rapid. The KS is is slow. Slow is the S donation, denotion. And so it's slow to close. What happens is say that there's 100. Let me get rid of that here. Let's let that fade. Say there's 100 calcium on the outside, and there's 25. Let me write that faster. 125. So in order for these to balance out here, what needs to happen? They need to both be at 50. With potassium, this is like 200, and it's like 5 out here. Not really, I don't know the real numbers. But pretty soon, calcium's going to stop wanting to come in because the driving force is going to be met. We're going to hit an equilibrium. And so then potassium's going to leave more, and that's what's going to cause this initial dip. And then the IK1 channels will open up here again, and then they'll just maintain this channel here. So that's what all of this says. So calcium comes in from the ECF to the ICF and attaches to the sacromere, causing contraction of the muscle. This also, that's what this calcium does as well, is it helps increase more potassium inside the cell to do more of a contraction here, which is kind of neat because for a cardiac muscle, unlike the other muscles, 90% comes from the ECF and 10% comes from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. For skeletal muscle, it was 100% sarcoplasmic reticulum. And then for the smooth muscle, it was 100% ECF. And so it's kind of interesting how that changes a little. Or sorry, for smooth, it was 50-50. It was 50-50 for both. So it's kind of interesting how when we allow calcium to come in, this is one way that it can attach to what we need it to attach to. We've kind of already talked about that. Another thing that can change and increase our heart rate is this endocrine system, but it does it pretty directly through the sympathetic nervous system, because the sympathetic nervous system, they're adrenergic receptors which need catecholamines, which is the epi and norepinephrine. So they release from the renal medulla, and more epinephrine gets into the body. So now let's talk about. Let's go here first. So this is how calcium gets into the body, and this is how these sacromeres are going to contract. And this is how kind of things are going to, how things are going to work here, and allow the sacromeres to contract. So calcium is going to come in. These T-tubules are a little bit larger than those of smooth muscles. This is that gap junction. This is that decimere. This is just, I just wrote it to have consistency. So an action potential will come in here. It'll do these L-type calcium channels. It'll open these up. Calcium will come by into the RYR. Calcium will come out of the smooth, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. But as well as what we kind of talked about before, these L-type channels will allow for calcium to come into the cell. And that's going to bind to troponin. The way we get things back into the cell is one way. So we get, the way we get calcium back out of the cell is through this NCX. It's a secondary active transport, and it's a antiport. So we have 3 sodium leaving, or going with the gradient, with their concentration gradient, because we have a ton of sodium out here. I don't know why I drew like 18 positives. We have tons of sodium out here. And so the driving force is going to bring it in. And while that brings it in, it's going to bring a calcium out. And so it's a symport kind of action. And then this is, I just forgot to write this in until just now. This is the Circa pump. And it runs off of ATP. And that allows for calcium to come back in to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Good grief, nothing's working for me. Okay, so now let's kind of go look at this. So these are all just kind of anatomy structures that I want to talk about. So this is the SA node. This is where most of the heartbeats come from. This is about 60 to 80 per minute, depending on the health of the heart and just kind of who we are and stuff like that. That's going to start the contraction. Once the contraction starts, it's going to send an action potential. And these are all autorhythmic. All of this green, and there's a little bit more, like this technically comes out like this, just to make sure that it gets everywhere. I just kind of drew it simply, but these are all not contractile, pacemaker or autorhythmic cells, and they send signals going here. This is the AV node. AV node sends a signal to the bundle of His. The bundle of His then sends signals to the left and to the right bundle. The left and the right bundle each have Purkinjes that send it the rest of the way through the ventricles. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of anatomy so that when we do something later, it'll make a lot more sense. But first, we have to understand kind of how an EKG works. So an EKG is a computer that we use to monitor the depolarization and repolarization. So the depolarization of the atrium and the repolarization and depolarization of the ventricles. And I'll explain why we won't get the repolarization of the of the atrium, only the depolarization. But what happens is this right here is demonstrating isoelectric line. So this is what so this is not an action potential at all whatsoever. This is only measuring dipole moments. So right now we have a net zero dipole moment. All of the charges on the outside are positive, and all of the charges on the inside of the cell are positive. So we have no net dipole effect. But these right here are leads that we put on the body to detect these dipole moments. So we have what was a positive here changing to a negative. So we have a negative tail going towards the positive direction. The computer is programmed to make that as a positive tick. So anytime we see that, and it can also be in reverse. So say that these are all negative, changing to a positive, and the vector's going down this way, well, then it's still going to be a positive tick because we're going from a positive tail to a negative sensor. We're still going up. But then I just said we're going up. Here is a perfect dipole moment. We have the same, let me fix that. We have the same amount of charges, positive charges, as we do negative charges outside of the cell. That's a perfect dipole moment. So this is going to be that peak. That's going to be the highest point. And as it drops down, it doesn't really drop down, right? I just said it's still going a negative tail to a positive, so it still should be going up, which it is. The reason why we see an arch there is because even though it's a continuous line, what it really is the machine is putting tick marks down there and over the distribution of time. So what'll happen is that it'll be like this. Well, the only way to get from this spot to this spot in a straight line is you have to bend that curve. Or else we'd see a straight line, 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 right? And it would just kind of look funky. And so this is the x-axis is time, and the y-axis is magnitude. Because this line right here, this arrow, that's velocity, or that's a vector. So vectors have both direction, which is what I was saying, right? We're a negative tail towards a positive sensor. That's a direction. And then this inversion of it is because we're taking a positive tail, or we're taking a positive and we're changing it to a negative, right? We see that. And it's going from a negative from a positive to a negative. So we have a negative tail towards a negative. What does that denote? A downward tick or downward, what did I call it? Yeah, downward tick, a downward motion. So now let's put all this together and let's look at these. And I'm going to switch to here because I intentionally did not write this so I could draw this for everybody to see my beautiful, beautiful artwork. So this is what's going to happen. So we're working with vectors, and vectors have what? Direction and magnitude. I say that, and all I can think of is the kids show with Vector, the Minions movie, Despicable Me. That's all I can think about. But anyways, so this is what happens. So our vector is going down this way, and we can see that vectors we can do vector addition, and so we can get just one general direction. And that general direction is exactly where I'm going, is this way here. And so let me fix that a little bit here. And then I'm going to change the color on us so we can see it just a little bit better. So we get this general direction. This SA node is making, sending an action potential to the contractile muscles. And we're going in this relative direction. We have a positive thing here, and we have a negative sensor there. Okay, so this is a normal cell. This is what a normal cell looks like. Just an average Joe cell at rest, and this is isoelectric. But we see a tick starting right here, right? An upward direction. So what's happening is we're getting depolarized. Depolarized denotes positive on the inside of the cell, negative on the outside of the cell. So now we have a negative tail going in a positive direction. We're going to start seeing this uptick. And I'm just, for convenience for everybody involved and speed of the matter, I am going to do this. Our vector is going to change a little bit just because now we're having to move over to the left atrium as well, because they both have to, but we're still depolarizing. We're still moving down. Oh, negative, negative. We're still depolarizing. And at this point, we're going to see the highest peak because I just added that because I needed to in order for my analogy to make sense. We have 3 negative on the outside and 3 positive on the outside. That's a perfect dipole moment. We're going to get our highest peak right here. Okay? Whoa, what in the world just happened? We're going to get our highest peak there, which is great. So then it's going to continue down. And I'm going to steal this again here. Duplicate. And now our vector is going to change just a little bit, but not really that much. We're still going down through a negative tail in a positive direction. I want to make sure I didn't ruin anything. And so now we're going to keep going. These are going to turn negative. That's positives here. We're going to go down. And then finally, at the very, very end, the last part of it is we're going to come right over here. And we have then depolarized our entire cell, which is why we're back at this isoelectric line. You can see that's a straight line all the way through and all of these charges. So again, it doesn't just denote that positives all have to be on the outside. It doesn't matter. All it's saying is that all of my charges are like charges on the outside and like charges on the inside. And they're, of course, going to be opposite, right? But it's going to be like charges. And so that's what happens. This is the depolarization. I'm going to write this down here. Depolarization of the atrium. Good grief. Underline it. Make it look pretty. Okay. So this is that depolarization of the atrium. This is the contraction that's going to push blood from here to our ventricles, from here to here. Okay? That's just what's going to happen, whether you like it or not. So in between here, we talked about that skeleton fiber. There's like a thing that goes right here. It's a structure. It's it cancels out currents. And so the reason why that's kind of important is because it just is it if it was not there, depolarization would continue to occur going down this way at the same time. What actually happens, hi buddy. What actually happens is that bundle of his comes down and it. So this is the AV node. This is the SA node. The AV node bundle of his will come down and it'll start depolarizing. So I'm going to write this before. Depolarization of the ventricles. Not the ventricles. Of the ventricles. This is going to start here. And we're going to have a vector going in this general direction. And that's closer to the positive than it is to the negative. But we're changing the cell from a negative on the outside to a positive. Or sorry, we're changing a positive from the outside to a negative, and we're going towards a negative tail, denoting a downwards motion. Downwards this way. But you can see the vector is not super close to this electrode, and so the magnitude's not going to be super great. It's just a little tick down. So that's what happens here. The cell is going, and I'll draw this one out, and then I'll change it up for the next ones here. Ugh, this is the worst. I hate when I do this. Positive. It's going to turn negative. This is going to be positive. So negative tail going towards a negative sensor. It's gonna cause a downward tick. Then we're gonna come over here and we're gonna get this vector again that has, about here, because the Purkinje fibers are gonna run through here and the left and right bundles are gonna run through there. And so we're gonna get this cell again, and it's gonna be the exact same thing that we just looked at, except for this part is going to be the exact same. So what's going to happen is that we are going to get these negative charges forming, and this is going to be the highest point because it's going to have the nicest dipole effect, or like a perfect dipole effect, and we're going to get this big magnitude. And it's a huge uptick because it's very close to this sensor here. It's very close to this sensor. But it also has a lot of depolarization occurring. Now we're going to get we're obviously changing magnitude, and we're going, I would say this way would be our vector addition. So we have this cell, and now we're still depolarizing, so we're still going from a negative, a positive to a negative. We're going from a negative to a positive, but we're going a negative tail to a negative electrode, and it's going to cause a down tick. And again, this isn't, obviously the magnitude's not that great because it's only a dot in time, but it's got to be connected by a line. So there's a dot here, there's a dot here, and there's a dot here. And the only way to connect them is to make this dramatic thing look the way it is. But in reality, it's not. It didn't drop down because it's got such great magnitude. It's not, because we only are depolarizing a little bit. So then that happens, and then once it's fully depolarized, we're going to have the cell, and it's going to be fully negative on the outside. Oh, son of a butt. Fully negative on the outside and completely positive on the inside. Nope. Yeah. Yep, that's right. And that's what's going to cause it to go back to this isometric line. Now, let's go look at our repolarization. So this is repolarization of the ventricles. Now, we're going this way. Right? I would say our common vectors this way. Now, the outside of our cells are all already depolarized. We're repolarizing, so we're going, so these are all negative. Good grief, I hate it when that happens. It's so hard with these pictures sometimes. Sorry. I'm just going to do 4 to make my life a lot easier. So we're going from a positive tail to a negative vector. It's going to cause an uptick right here. This is what we're looking at right here. Okay. And the same thing's going to happen. I'm going to move this a little closer. And then I'm going to move all of this and duplicate it and come over here. And so it's just going to continue. And we're going to get a bigger dipole effect. And now it's at its peak, right? Because it's got the strongest magnitude. We're still going in this direction. So we're still making it like this. And we're still repolarizing. We have no more vector because we're all repolarized. So I'm going to erase that line. But now this is what our cell looks, and we're back to normal. Now, you're asking, well, we have to repolarize. We did the atrium. We depolarized the atrium. We depolarized the ventricles, and we repolarized the ventricles. But why didn't we repolarize the atrium? Well, that's because this happens as this repolarizes. And this, obviously, as you can see from here, is very, very noisy. And so it's just going to mask the repolarization of the ventricle, so we won't be able to see it. Okay, now let's break something. Let's invert the T waves. What causes that is, now let's do a little bit more drawing here. We have some blood vessels that innervate, and they come in and they feed this muscle. This is the endocardium. And this is the epicardium. Super important. Super important. Actually, up here, let's talk about that. This is the endo. And this is the epi. So for depolarization, it goes endo to epi. That's the direction of depolarization. Repolarization goes from epi to endo. Repolarization goes from epi to endo. Again, stupid important, especially because of down here. So what happens is we're going to get this inverted T wave. It's going to get this downtick. What's going to happen is that there's going to be some blockage up here, and I'm actually going to draw that in. There's going to be some stenosis that's causing hypoxia. Good grief. It's causing hypoxia to this whole cell, to all of the cells. So what's going to happen? Hypoxia, decreased blood or oxygen in the blood. Decreased oxygen in the blood. Or, sorry, not decreased oxygen in the blood. It causes decreased oxygen within the cells because there's less blood, which causes less ATP to get there, which causes the sodium potassium ATPase that controls and regulates resting membrane potential to go down. And so we're going to have a higher resting membrane potential because there's going to be more positives outside the cell than inside the cell. And then there's also these IK-ATPase channels, or ATP channels that open due to decreased ATP. So they're inactivated by ATP. And so what's going to happen is that what should happen is, this is looking at the repolarization state, right? So what should happen is repolarization should go from endo or epi to endo. But what happens is depolarization goes in the correct way, but then repolarization goes in the incorrect way. And it's going from endo to epi. And so the epi or the endo is the first to depolarize, which is normal, and also the first to repolarize. So we're taking a positive going towards a positive, or we're taking a positive tail going towards a positive sensor, giving that there. Now, this is what happens with prolonged that. What happens is that the cells start to die, and hypoxia, ischemia starts, and these cells become constantly, I just covered that up. That was so stupid of me. The cells become constantly negative. And so, again, let's draw some blood supply. And for this one, blood supply is blocked here or reduced here. And so if it's reduced here and blood's trying to get back here, the farther down the channel, the less blood. So death is going to occur here before it will here. And so our vector is going this way, okay? And that's causing this whole complex to increase, because when it's supposed, because what's going to happen is that the EKG is going to sense, instead of everything being positive or everything being negative, it's going to say there is a dipole moment. And it's a positive dipole moment because the negative charge is dying and going toward, or it's going towards, the negative charge is going towards a positive, which is going to cause an uptick. But I don't understand why. I don't understand what's going on. So it's going to represent a new, not isoelectric line, because this is still our isoelectric line. Right? This is still our isoelectric line, right? Because we can't change an isoelectric line. Isoelectric line is defined as everything on the outside is the same as everything on the inside. So it's going to do an uptick. It's going to say, okay, we have a negative tail going to a positive direction, and that's weird. So what's going to happen is it's going to go through that whole thing. And then what happens here? Why does it come back here? Well, because during the depolarization makes the cell more negative, which means the outside of the cell, which is what that negative denotes, it's all going to be negative. So at depolarization, at the end of depolarization, everything's going to be negative. So the EKG machine's going to say, okay, now there's no more dipole moments. So it's going to take it back to this resting membrane or this isoelectric line. But depolarization is still going to happen the same way. So we're still going to get that uptick. But again, this occurs because this is dead. This side, oh my goodness gracious, I just gave you a seizure. This is dead and dying and going in a direction of depolarization, so a negative tail towards a positive, and that's causing an uptick in everything. I'm really hoping that makes sense, because it makes total sense to me, but I'm a horrible teacher sometimes. And this is a pretty rough concept. So now, this is ST depression. So the S and T waves are depressed. And they're depressed because they had a bad day because part of their heart doesn't work. And I remember ST elevation because I'm extra mad that I didn't fix my ST depression. I'm extra mad. I'm elevating my anger because now I've made things worse. Now you look at this, you're like, what in the crap? ST depression can cause ST elevation. Look at this blood flow again, right? We have this blood flow that comes in. And what happens is all of this starts to die. Ischemia starts. And the ischemia starts dying out in this way. So we have a negative tail, maybe with the center vector of this way, which just on the last one causes this to go down. We see a downtick, right? So that doesn't invert these things because these things are still working appropriately. But this is our isoelectric line. And we're going to see that because at depolarization coming here to here, everything's going to be negative here. And so we're going to see, what are we going to see? We're going to see an isoelectric line, and that's going to come up here. And then it's going to repolarize from here to here, endo or epi to endo, and we're going to see it come back down because we have, even at the end of it, we still have this dipole effect. Crazy cool. Crazy cool. Kind of hard to understand, a little bit confusing, but crazy awesome. Last thing I want to do, and then I'll be done for the night. Last thing I want to talk about is our cardiac cycle. This cardiac cycle is a pretty cool thing. Sorry, I just wanted to look at timing. This cardiac cycle is a pretty cool thing. Basically what this is talking about is the movement of heart in the perspective of the left ventricle. Again, the movement of blood from the perspective of the left ventricle. That's all we're looking at. We're looking at pressure, volume, and the valves that are connected to the left ventricle and how those valves open and close and open and close. And those opening and closing makes noises. So let's go through it. Let's start at, let's say, 1. So 1 is talking about distally. Distally is sectioned out into 3 distinct sections, and each section takes about, well, let's say a third. So in the first third, what happens? The mitral valve opens. Mitral valve is the valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle, which means blood is going to go in. So we see volume increasing here. I'm going to switch back to this. We see blood volume increasing. We don't see a change in pressure, but we see blood increasing. As blood increases, that's the first section. So this opens, allowing blood to get into the ventricles. This second part is called diastasis, and it's basically the same thing, but it's the valve's already open, so it just goes in a little bit more. And then as it continues, the atrium, right, we see this. This is the contraction of the atrium, and that's going to push the other. So this is about 70 to 80, 70 to 30, 80% of blood goes in there. This is the other 20 to 30% that all gets in there. And this is important only mostly when we're working out or, exhausting a lot of energy. Then we're going to get more, then we're going to need more blood, more oxygen, more things like that. But you notice that happens and coincides. This is an EKG right here. That coincides with the depolarization of the atrium. Now let's look at. So now that was diastole. In in almost its majority, because we still have this part of diastole that we have to talk about, this part right here, and we will. But I like how we're going, so let's keep going. So then what happens is now there's more pressure in, because this contracts, there's a lot of volume here, and this is also contraction of the ventricles, so pressure is going to increase, right? And when pressure increases, it's going to cause the aortic valve, to open, causing blood to get into the aorta. So the aorta is going to start at 0 millimeters of mercury, and this is going to start at 0 millimeters of mercury, and it's going to make its way up to, let's say, 80. And as that continues, the pressure is going to continue to release blood, and this is the ejection phase of systole. It's going to cause blood to leave. At the end of it, it's going to cause the aortic valve to close. That's what we see right here. And it's going to close at around 80. And when that closes, we have our aorta. And when it closes, pressure of what blood was going in here, it's going to kind of settle and it's going to hit back on this valve. And because this is so elastic, they're going to spread this way. And then we have our coronary arteries that come off here, and they're going to be fed during that time. That's why this is kind of so important. This is called the dicrotic notch. And this is the feeding of the arteries and also the stretch of it. And if this is too high or too strong, we can actually, what in the world? We can actually really hurt our arteries, specifically our coronary arteries. Like there can be some real damage that does occur from that. So that opens. Now what happens in 6 is that the aortic valve closes, which means pressure decreases in the ventricle, and by the time it decreases, it will decrease enough, so the ventricle pressure will decrease enough to have the atrium have more pressure, causing the bicuspid or mitral valve to open, allowing blood to get into the ventricles, and the system goes again and again and again. So these lub and dub noises are the closing of the mitral valve is the first one, dub. Lub is the second one, and this right here is actually a third one, and that's from the mitral valve opening and the blood flooding into the ventricle. It causes this vibration noise, and this vibration noise allows, you can hear a shh noise. So you can get a lub sh dub, a lub sh dub, a lub sh dub, right? So we can auscultate these or listen to them, and we can kind of figure out what's going on. We can't always hear the shh part, but if you do, it's a completely normal noise to hear. But sometimes it can change in its speed and frequency depending on what's going on. So I think I covered everything. As always, please let me know what I did wrong, or if I can explain it any better way. Any feedback is a good thing. As Brother Hunt says, feedback is a gift, and I'm learning to appreciate that. So just let me know. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.